Welcome to another chat with Matt. Thank you for coming back today. Today's a special chat with Matt because this is our first time that we've actually got one of our clients on, and I'm delighted that we've got JJ Thakkar joining us today. Now, JJ is a HR exec for Cytiva. Cytiva, or formerly GE Life Sciences, part of Danaher, and JJ is going to talk to us today about continuous learning, a topic which is really close, certainly to my heart. I know it is to JJ's in the conversation that we just had. So, JJ, first things first, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking. I got about 8 hours of sleep, which is a rarity for me. Had some exercise yesterday, and the sun is shining. So what else can I ask for?
Yeah, all the stars are aligning for you today, that's for sure. 8 hours sleep, I didn't achieve that last night, but I strive to achieve that tonight, that's for sure. So let's go straight into this. There's lots going on. You and your organization have been through change this year. We've been through COVID and still going through COVID. What's your sense, JJ, if you don't mind me asking, around the state of business as it is at the moment?
I think there's a great deal of uncertainty in business in general. In the area that we're in, Cytiva and life sciences, it's anything but uncertainty. We're seeing demand literally through the roof for our products, which are used to manufacture biologics, pharmaceutical drugs. And so we're involved in, of the 200 clinical trials and investigations going on to COVID vaccines, we're involved in the large majority of them. So we're having demand through the roof, and we're lucky to be in the fortunate position to do a lot of hiring. Not all companies are there. And so this is the kind of threat, if you like, that we're experiencing with COVID that none of us have seen. I mean, I can think through my professional career. We had 9/11, we had the Great Recession of 2008, and now we've got COVID. I've never seen anything like this, where companies and governments are having to come up with new solutions that in the past would have been unheard of. And I think the other piece too is there's a greater emphasis now, companies paying attention to the well-being of employees, mental health especially, and that's something that we're looking at. And I think it's a topic that's been opened up a lot more across the globe. I was with a colleague this morning in China, and we were talking about some of the activities that they're doing, and they're actually having what they're calling a manager open house in a few weeks' time, where they're encouraging employees to talk to their managers on any topic, including personal topics, career development, mental health. They have launched actually an app in Chinese on Android and Apple to talk about mental health and where they can get resources. So clearly, if we were to think about something like this 6-9 months ago, it's unheard of, and it's a challenge that we're all trying to come to and face. And so while there's uncertainty, I'm also kind of impressed with the level of innovation that's going on at the level of companies and employees advocating for it.
And I think never before has there been a time where the work that organizations like yours are doing is so under the spotlight, so essential into whatever the change might be moving forward. So, I guess, yes, you'll be profiting from it, no question about that. However, that's not the main driver. The main driver is how can you help society return to, whatever normal will be moving forward. Would that be a fair statement?
Oh, absolutely, Matt. And I think that's one of the great things that we have is we talk a lot of times about, the employee value proposition and finding meaning from work. What more meaning can you get than to go to work and say, I'm on the front line of trying to find a cure for COVID. Yeah. We actually had one of the sites where the manufacturing site leader got T-shirts for folks that had the logo on the front and the back and said, "This is my hero cape," on the front lines of COVID. And I think it's also fantastic because, in a situation like this, we're all working long hours, in many cases, facing a great deal of uncertainty, not seeing our families, but our families are very supportive of what we're doing because they understand the difference that we make. In normal times, it's great that we work for a company that's developing therapies to cure childhood leukemia, and we get to meet patients who survived because of the therapies that we help produce. But now what we're doing, as you said, is in the spotlight every day. And it's one of those things where many times I've had to struggle to explain to my parents or my neighbors what our company does or what I do. And now they get it, right? They're asking, so, what's going to happen with the vaccine? When do you think it's going to happen? And in some ways, we're going from being sort of experts on the side to being thrust in the spotlight, which sometimes can be uncomfortable. But every time you have an interaction like that, it reinforces just how meaningful is the work that you're doing.
Can I ask JJ, how do you think technology is accelerating that ability to find a vaccine quicker than maybe it did 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's a combination of technology, as well as the fact that for the first time in humankind, you've had such a massive concentration of brain power and resources fighting a single issue, right? Going and focusing on a single problem. So from a technology perspective, one of the big drivers was the fact that they were able to map the genes of COVID and get all that data out very quickly to the scientists, who were then able to use that to start developing therapies for that. And so that's probably the first big piece. The second piece is then the industrialization and the ability to scale up to develop vaccines. So you're familiar here in the UK, Oxford is working on a potential vaccine, and theirs technology is a little bit different, right, in the way that they're doing doses. But what they're saying is, something in a cup this size will be able to contain 8 million doses,
wow.
Which is very different, and then scaling that up. And then the other piece, as I said, is you've got such a massive number of people. As I said, the last count, there's over 200 trials going on looking at a cure for COVID. Never in the history of mankind have you had so many people focused on a problem with such singular focus, that I think that's what's going to get the speed, and potentially, hopefully, we may see a vaccine next year. And I say maybe, I'm not an expert, number one, and number two, there are already some early signs in some countries that potentially, as you start seeing a resurgence of this, COVID is actually morphing, which will present a new set of challenges if that is indeed the case.
I think all that aside, JJ, from somebody looking at your organization outside in, never before has there been a time where, we are so reliant, so grateful, so thankful for the work that your collective brains are doing, because it's so important. Without that, who knows what the future holds. So we could talk about that for many hours, I'm sure. But let's move on and talk about continuous learning, because actually, off the back of what you were just saying there, the technology advances, I guess we're learning from an industry perspective all the time. What you and I talked about before we started this recording today is, let's think about us for a moment. Our continuous learning is essential, as we grow as human beings. And I know you're deeply passionate about that. So give me a little bit more on that from your perspective.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I've always enjoyed is learning. And when I say learning, it's not necessarily in the classroom, let's say, in the formal courses they send you on. I will admit, one of the reasons I joined GE, which is now Cytiva, is the reputation GE has as being a learning organization. I mean, they had Crotonville, which is considered to be a pinnacle of executive education, and it's a learning organization. But from a personal perspective, I think about my career, and I've constantly reinvented myself. And the one red line through that is a passion for learning and the intellectual curiosity. I was a management consultant for many years for all my sins before crossing over and sitting on the other side of the table as a corporate executive. And even before being a management consultant, I was a diplomat. And so you can say, well, how does a diplomat go into management consulting and end up in HR? And a lot of it had to do with looking at themes in my life. And one of the things about being a diplomat is you have to pull information from all different areas across to have a holistic picture. It's a big strategic role, but you're pulling in information from economics, from sociology, from psychology, from history, foreign languages, and pulling all that together. That allows you to look at things in a big picture. And one of the big things that I've seen over my professional career, stretching back 20, 25 years, I'm dating myself, is the advent of a push for individuals to learn on their own, and what I would call a great democratization of education and knowledge. We have podcasts now on a variety of topics. We have TED Talks, where it used to be sort of the remit of going to an elite university or certain kind of offsite courses to get this information. Now anyone can get it anywhere and any time. And I think, the world is moving very fast. I think about my grandfather, who ran a travel agency for decades. you don't have that anymore. And trying to explain to my 11-year-old son what a travel agent does, and he's like, well, can't you just get Google Flights around there? And trying to explain that you constantly need to understand what's happening, arm yourself with knowledge to reinvent yourself, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. And it's really up to you as an individual to do that. And take your passion, take your knowledge, and parlay that into something that you can profit from or you can contribute back to society.
Thanks, really, really good. And one thing that we hear quite often is, yeah, but all that takes time. You know, we're in the learning space, we're in the sales productivity space, and that's the thing that we can't do it with. This takes too long. And I think to a degree, if you try and chunk things up too big, it does take too long. If you chunk things down, and one example you gave me earlier before we started today was podcasts. You know, so this podcast is specifically designed and set up to be short,
right?
So that if you are between meetings or you're walking to wherever, you can put it on for 9-10 minutes and take one thing away from our podcast, and it helps you learn. Then we've achieved great things. So what do? You know, if you look at your learning and the best practices that you found that have really worked for you, what would be your top, let's say 1 or 2 things that have worked for you that you would recommend to other people?
So I mean, it's going to sound a bit of a cliche, but it is honestly true. Stay hungry, stay curious. You know, I am a voracious reader, albeit nowadays it's mostly on my phone and my iPad. And I try to read things both from a professional perspective, HR-ish, life sciences, but then more broader. And especially the broader pieces that I find more interesting, because it allows me to bring ideas from certain areas, right? Whether it is IT technology or aerospace and things that they're doing, whether it's around education, the use of robotics, and think about how does that apply to what we're trying to do and some of the problems that we have. Because I think too often times we're so narrowly focused in our own space that we don't take a step back and look to bring those ideas together. Then the other part I look at doing is, as you said, podcasts. I love podcasts. I probably am in the middle of 3 or 4 of them at any one time. Not just business ones, other ones that actually help stimulate my curiosity. One of the best ones you and I were talking about that I love, having moved here 5 years ago, I think it's an institution in the UK, is Desert Island Discs. Yes. Because you get people from all parts of society, from the arts, politicians, scientists, etc., who explain things that they're passionate about, things that have meaning for them. And it allows you to kind of think through a little bit of what's important to you. And it's fascinating as you hear these conversations, sort of their philosophies and their experiences. It allows you to connect there. And so that's what I do. And, you know, I will say one of the downsides of working from home is not having the commute, because the commute was my time to listen to the podcasts in the morning and the evening. And I'm having to find myself trying to block time in the morning or the evening, usually when I'm exercising, to get through the podcasts.
Yeah, I do the same thing actually. It's that dedicated time where you know you're doing something. You know, whether you're in the gym or you're on for a walk or whatever it may be. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and it's perfect time just to digest learning. And do you know the word you've used 2 or 3 times, JJ, which I think is really interesting, is curiosity. Yeah. I'm a big believer that if people could live their life in a state of curiosity and wonder, that says, you know, rather than judge people for what they're doing, be curious about why they're doing and behaving in a certain way. And actually, it de-stresses you straight away, because you don't judge, you then don't react. You become curious, to use your word, and that changes the game, doesn't it?
And Matt, it's very interesting. I'm going to venture into a bit of a political territory for a second, but I just came back from the States, having spent 3 weeks there in Texas, and the level of dysfunction and politicalization is much greater when you're there seeing it than being in this side of the pond and reading about it. And exactly to your point, if you're curious around other people's views, you may not agree with it, but it helps sharpen your own thought process and your own argument and try to engage in dialogue. I wish, you know, our politicians and thought leaders and stuff would have a greater level of curiosity, because I think it would de-escalate things. But that's, I'll venture back into the safe lane out of politics, but absolutely, I think you're right.
So we're saying listen to podcasts, you know, consume learning when you can, be curious. Yeah. Anything else?
And I would say reach out in your network. You never know what people have and what their knowledge and what their passions are. And people love to talk about themselves. I'm probably a good example of that. And if you can, you know, reach out to your networks, find out what they're interested in, use your network as a way to learn from them. It's a two-way exchange, and I think we don't do that enough, frankly.
I think you're right. I think someone used a great analogy a few years ago. They said when you're a kid, if you can think of yourself as a an English castle, it's got a moat around it, but you've got a drawbridge that comes down,
Yeah.
and the drawbridge is the information flowing in and out.
Absolutely.
When you're a kid, the drawbridge is completely down. As you get into adulthood, you start to reel that drawbridge up, and the information flow kind of either stops or it falls into the moat.
Absolutely.
Which is a shame. And and if we can all live with that state of curiosity that you're talking about,
Yeah.
where the drawbridge is down and we're open to new ideas, new learning, expanding our own thinking, if you will.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And
You might grow as an individual.
Absolutely. And I think the last point I'll say is that excitement that you get when you put two and two together, right? Taking two disparate ideas, two different thoughts, and actually coming up with something that you can apply, right? Personal life, professionally. That kind of excitement, that's what keeps me going, right? That's the piece. And I've said always that when I stop learning at a company, stop learning in a role, that's time for me to move on, right? It's not about the trappings and the pay and things like that. It's about satisfying my own intellectual curiosity. I've done HR in a variety of industries. I've done it in finance, I've done it in aerospace, I've done it in oil and gas, and now here in life sciences. The challenges in these industries are very similar in the HR space, but what makes it different is the context, right?
Yeah.
Life sciences is very different than energy, and we can take a look at the cyclical nature of both of those, which is very different than aerospace. And it's that context and learning how to apply the context with the situation that you have and the problems that you have that makes it exciting, at least for me.
Yeah, no, and I guess, again, that's that curiosity space, isn't it? So
Yeah.
if more people could be like that would be great. So outside of, thank you, Jay, it's really fascinating. What do you do outside of work to keep you interested?
I do a lot of travel. My wife and I are never travelers. We travel all over the world. And I guess that's part of feeding the wanderlust and the curiosity. A bit of a gourmet cook, a terrible golfer. Love the fine arts and spending time with my family, my wife and my son who lives in the States. So you can see I combine family and travel and a little bit of the gourmet part. And I'll be honest, I've lived here in the UK for 5 years. You still get better tacos, better Tex-Mex and barbecue in Texas than you do here. So.
Well, there you go. We'll always like to end our chat with Matt with a little bit of controversy, JJ, and I think you've just done that. I guess there'll be people who agree. I have to say, on that point, the best tacos I ever had were in Houston.
I wouldn't be surprised. I lived in Houston for 10 years. I'll buy that. I'll buy that. We'll agree there's better tacos in Texas than there is in London.
Right. Okay. We'll agree to that, and we won't tell anybody else.
That sounds good.
That sounds good. So, JJ, I want to thank you for your time.
Thanks, man.
And investing your time to share some of your thoughts today. I want to thank you and your colleagues for the great work that you're doing to help find a vaccine for coronavirus. It's a vital thing. And our goal, as I said earlier, is to get people thinking differently, to give you one thing that will take you into a different way of thinking, a different way of learning. And JJ, the stuff you've given us and the listeners and readers today has been very, very powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity, Matt. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you again very soon on another chat with Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks.